The clinking of champagne glasses at the Crescent Hospitality Gala sounded like a celebration, but to Rupert, it felt like a countdown. He stood beside his wife, Bellamy, her hand resting lightly, too lightly, on his arm. "And this," she told her colleagues with a tight, practiced smile, "is my husband, sadly." The laughter that followed was polite, but the chill in her eyes was absolute. Something had shifted in their marriage, a quiet rot hidden beneath Michelin star ambitions. If you love stories of culinary ambition, dark betrayal, and the bitter taste of revenge, subscribe and stay with us. The air in the ballroom of the St. Charles Hotel was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, bourbon, and the undeniable electricity of New Orleans' culinary elite. Rupert stood near the edge of the velvet-draped room, feeling entirely out of place in his tailored tuxedo. His hands, calloused and scarred from years behind a hot line, felt clumsy wrapped around the delicate stem of a champagne flute. A few feet away stood his wife, Bellamy. She was holding court, radiant in an emerald evening gown that caught the ambient light like crushed glass. As a senior executive for Crescent Hospitality, this was her domain. She moved through the crowd of investors and restaurateurs with a predatory grace, navigating the politics of the food industry effortlessly. Rupert watched her, a hollow ache settling beneath his ribs. They had been married for 7 years, yet lately, looking at her felt like trying to read a menu in a language he had long forgotten. "Bellamy, darling." A man in a bespoke suit slurred slightly, gesturing toward Rupert. "Is this the genius behind the new French Quarter project we've been hearing whispers about?" Bellamy turned. Her smile was sharp, a perfectly calculated expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. She slipped her arm through Rupert's, her fingertips cold against his sleeve. "Oh, Richard," she laughed, a sound as brittle as spun sugar. "This is my husband, sadly." The small circle of executives chuckled. It was packaged as a joke, a piece of self-deprecating high society banter. But Rupert felt the word sadly slide into his chest like a paring knife. He looked at Bellamy, expecting a reassuring squeeze of his arm, a secret glance to soften the blow. Instead, she was already turning back to Richard, her attention dismissing Rupert entirely. Her hand dropped from his arm, leaving a phantom chill in its wake. Rupert took a slow sip of his champagne, the bubbles turning to ash in his mouth. The disconnect between them had been growing for months, ever since he poured their life savings into L'Etoile Noire, his upcoming restaurant. Bellamy had claimed she was merely stressed about his financial risk, but this public humiliation, was something darker. Excusing himself quietly, Rupert navigated toward the balcony to escape the suffocating heat of the ballroom. The humid night air of the French Quarter hit him instantly, carrying the faint sound of a distant jazz trumpet. He leaned against the wrought iron railing, trying to steady his breathing and clear the humiliation from his mind. As he stood in the shadows, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an alert from their shared cloud account, a sync notification from an old tablet Bellamy kept in her home office. Rupert pulled it out, intending to swipe it away. But the preview text frozen on the illuminated screen made his blood run cold. "The opening is Friday. I've laid the groundwork. He won't survive the weekend." Rupert stared at the glowing screen, the jazz music fading into a dull roar in his ears. The rich, earthy aroma of simmering veal stock usually grounded Rupert, but this morning, the kitchen of L'Etoile Noire felt like a pressure cooker. Stainless steel gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic chopping of his sous chef, Marcus, provided a steady metronome to the chaos of prep week. Friday was only 4 days away. This restaurant was supposed to be Rupert's masterpiece, the culmination of a decade of grueling shifts, burned hands, and leveraged credit. Now, a shadowy dread hung over the prep tables. Rupert stared blankly at a reduction bubbling on the French top stove. His mind was miles away, anchored to the balcony of the St. Charles Hotel and that single, terrifying notification. "The opening is Friday. I've laid the groundwork. He won't survive the weekend." He had spent the entire weekend agonizing over whether to confront Bellamy. If he asked her outright, He risked detonating their marriage just days before the most important launch of his career. He needed absolute focus. He needed his palate sharp and his mind clear. But the alternative, pretending everything was fine while a silent timer ticked down to his destruction, was tearing him apart from the inside. "Chef, the truffles from Alba just arrived," Marcus called out, wiping his brow with a side towel. Rupert nodded mechanically, his jaw tight. "Check the weight, then lock them in the walk-in. Don't let anyone else handle them." He retreated to his small, cramped office tucked behind the dry storage room, closing the door against the clatter of the kitchen. He pulled out his phone, staring at the screenshot he had managed to quietly capture from the sync tablet at home. He had planned to dig deeper the next morning, but he had woken up to find Bellamy had abruptly changed her cloud password. It was a swift, calculated move that only deepened his paranoia. Why lock a digital door they had shared for years unless she realized she had left it ajar? Bellamy had claimed her sudden late nights were due to a PR crisis at Crescent Hospitality. "They're demanding all hands on deck," she had told him, adjusting her designer coat in the hallway mirror without meeting his eyes. Yet, the valet ticket he had found crumpled in the laundry told a different story. It was from a luxury boutique hotel in the Garden District, stamped with the time she supposedly spent in a downtown boardroom. More unsettling was the lingering scent of gardenias and expensive, dark tobacco on her clothes, a fragrance that belonged to dim, intimate lounges, not sterile corporate offices. Rupert rubbed his temples, the heavy throb of a stress migraine beginning to build. He opened his laptop, trying to force his attention back to the final seating chart for Friday night's opening. Bellamy's firm had exclusively handled the VIP guest list, a supposed favor to save him money. As his tired eyes scanned the spreadsheet of local influencers and investors, they stopped dead on one specific entry, highlighted in bold for the Prime Center table. Honora Vance, lead critic, the Crescent City Palette. The H from the text. A cold, heavy stone dropped into Rupert's stomach. Honora was notorious, a merciless culinary executioner whose reviews could shutter a multi-million-dollar restaurant within a month. And Bellamy had personally ensured she was coming on opening night. The pre-tasting event on Wednesday night was meant to be a soft launch, a final dress rehearsal to iron out the kinks before the grand opening. The dining room of L'Etoile Noire glowed with warm, amber light, reflecting off the polished brass fixtures and the dark mahogany tables. Rupert stood at the kitchen pass, his chef's coat pristine, watching the invited guests mingle over delicate hors d'oeuvres. But his eyes were anchored to the front entrance. When Honora Vance arrived, the atmospheric pressure in the room seemed to shift. She was a striking woman, tall and sharp-featured, draped in a charcoal silk trench coat that rustled as she moved. Her reputation as the most merciless food critic in New Orleans preceded her, but to Rupert, she was no longer just a journalist. She was H. Bellamy, who had spent the evening working the room with her usual corporate detachment, instantly transformed. She glided across the floor toward the entrance, her rigid posture softening into something fluid and relaxed. Rupert watched from the shadows of the pass, his breath caught tight in his chest. As the two women greeted each other, Bellamy leaned in close, kissing Honora on both cheeks. It was a standard industry greeting, but the lingering slide of Bellamy's hand across Honora's lower back lasted a fraction of a second too long. Rupert stepped out of the kitchen, carrying a tray of seared scallop amuse-bouches to their reserved table, desperate to bridge the distance and assert his presence. As he approached, an invisible wall hid him before he even set the plates down. It was the scent, gardenias and dark tobacco. The exact, intoxicating fragrance that had clung to Bellamy's coat 3 nights ago. His stomach plummeted, the jagged puzzle pieces locking together with sickening clarity. "Rupert," Bellamy said, looking up as he arrived. Her voice had dropped into a register he hadn't heard in years, a husky, intimate tone that she used to reserve entirely for him. "You know Honora, of course." By reputation, Rupert replied evenly, fighting to keep his hands steady as he placed the delicate porcelain plates on the linen tablecloth. Honora looked up, her dark eyes piercing and entirely devoid of warmth. I am eager to see if the reality lives up to your wife's hype, chef. She speaks of your potential quite often. The word potential hung in the air, tasting distinctly like an insult. Bellamy offered a small, private smile to the critic, a silent exchange of shared knowledge passing between them in the span of a single glance. Rupert stood there, suddenly feeling like a trespasser in his own dining room. He watched as Honora picked up her fork, but her gaze remained fixed on Bellamy. The unspoken chemistry between them was a tangible force, raw and undeniable, vibrating violently just beneath the veneer of polite society. Rupert retreated to the kitchen, the blistering heat of the stoves offering no comfort. The betrayal was no longer just a digital ghost on a screen. It was breathing his air, drinking his wine. Later that evening, as the final plates were cleared and the guests began to filter out onto the street, Rupert scanned the room. Bellamy was gone. So was Honora. Glancing toward the back of the house, he noticed the heavy oak door leading down to the private wine cellar was left slightly ajar. The descent into the wine cellar of L'Etoile Noir was always a tactile experience for Rupert. The air grew cooler with every step, the humid New Orleans night replaced by the precise, climate-controlled chill that preserved his meticulously curated vintages. Tonight, however, the silence of the stone stairwell felt suffocating. He moved with practiced quietness, the soft soles of his kitchen clogs making no sound against the worn brick. Through the heavy oak door left open a crack, a sliver of golden light spilled across the landing. Rupert paused, his back pressed flat against the damp stone wall, holding his breath as the murmur of voices drifted up from the tasting room. You're taking a risk, coming down here tonight. Bellamy's voice was low, laced with an intoxicating blend of warning and desire. I had to see it for myself, Honora replied, her tone stripped of the icy professionalism she had worn upstairs. The great chef in his natural habitat. It's almost quaint, really, how much he believes this will work. Rupert squeezed his eyes shut, his fingers curled into fists, his fingernails biting painfully into his palms. The intimacy in their voices was unmistakable. It was the sound of two people who occupied a private world, one built entirely outside the boundaries of his marriage. He heard the unmistakable clink of crystal glasses, followed by the soft sound of wine being poured. The location is prime, Bellamy continued, the businesslike edge returning to her voice, albeit softer now. Crescent Hospitality has been eyeing this block for 3 years. But with him holding the lease, it was an impasse. And after Friday? Honora asked, the sound of her taking a sip echoing softly. Are you sure this is what you want, Bellamy? I want the regional director position, Bellamy said, a chilling finality in her tone. I've stalled out playing the supportive wife to a sinking ship. If L'Etoile Noir fails spectacularly out of the gate, he'll have no choice but to default on the loans. Crescent will buy the property out from under him for pennies, and I'll deliver the deal wrapped in a bow. You always were ruthlessly pragmatic, Honora murmured, a smile evident in her voice. My review will be brutal. Surgical. It's drafted. Once it hits the wire on Friday night, the investors will pull out before Monday morning. A soft rustling of clothing followed, and then the unmistakable sound of a kiss, long, breathless, and familiar. Rupert felt a physical wave of nausea wash over him. The floor beneath his feet seemed to tilt. It wasn't just an affair. It was a corporate assassination, orchestrated by the woman he loved, weaponizing the woman he feared. They were dismantling his life, piece by agonizing piece, and replacing it with a promotion and a new lover. He slowly backed away from the crack in the door, the cold stone of the wall seeping through his chef's coat, chilling him to the bone. He didn't burst into the room. He didn't scream or throw the nearest bottle of Bordeaux against the brick. He simply turned and ascended the stairs, a ghost in his own restaurant. When he reached the top, the kitchen was dark and silent. He stood there for a long moment, staring out into the empty dining room where Friday night's battle would take place. He wasn't just fighting for Michelin stars anymore. He was fighting for survival. Friday night descended upon the French Quarter with a thick, humid intensity, matching the chaotic energy inside the kitchen of L'Etoile Noir. The grand opening was completely booked. Waitstaff darted between the tables with military precision, the low hum of excited conversation vibrating through the elegant dining room. In the heart of the kitchen, the temperature hovered near 100 degrees. Rupert stood at the pass, a terrifying calm anchoring his movements. His whites were immaculate, his voice sharp and steady as he called out orders over the hiss of searing duck breast and the clatter of copper pans. Marcus moved beside him, a blur of motion, plating delicate garnishes with practiced hands. Everything was executing flawlessly. It was the best service of Rupert's life, a symphony of culinary perfection born from adrenaline and heartbreak. But beneath the surface of his focused exterior, a cold fury burned. He glanced through the small window in the swinging doors. Bellamy was holding court near the entrance, radiant in a crimson dress that commanded attention. She was playing the perfect hostess, greeting investors with a blinding smile, effortlessly managing the optics of a successful launch. It sickened him to watch her, knowing the knife she was holding behind her back. At 8:30 p.m., the atmosphere in the room perceptibly shifted. The hostess led Honora Vance to the prime center table, the very seat Bellamy had arranged. Honora moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. She was dining alone tonight, her notebook resting on the pristine white tablecloth like a weapon. The moment she sat down, the air in the kitchen grew heavy. "Table 12 is seated, chef," Marcus murmured, his eyes flicking toward the dining room. He knew the reputation of the critic, but he didn't know the personal stakes involved. "What's the play?" "We serve her the menu exactly as written," Rupert replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He watched as the first course, a delicate confit of rabbit with a blackberry gastrique, was carried out. He saw Honora take a single, agonizingly slow bite. She closed her eyes, her face an unreadable mask, then picked up her pen and scribbled a single line in her notebook. He knew it didn't matter how the food tasted. It didn't matter that the rabbit was perfectly tender or that the gastrique balanced the richness with a bright, acidic pop. The verdict had been decided before the fire was even lit under the stoves. The review was already drafted, waiting for the precise moment to detonate. As the night wore on, Rupert continued to execute the courses with mechanical brilliance. The seared scallops, the venison loin, the dark chocolate and espresso entremet. Each plate that left the kitchen was a masterpiece, a silent, defiant testament to his skill. He caught Bellamy's eye from across the room. She offered him a small, encouraging nod, a pantomime of wifely support. It was a flawless performance. If he hadn't stood on the stone steps of the wine cellar 2 nights ago, he might have believed it. "Fire the final course for 12, Rupert commanded, his voice echoing in the stifling heat of the kitchen. As the waiter carried the dessert out to Honora, Rupert's phone vibrated violently against his hip. It was 10:15 p.m., the exact time the late-night dining reviews hit the wire for the Sunday edition of the Crescent City Palette. Rupert felt the vibration of his phone like a second heartbeat against his hip. He didn't need to look at the screen to know what it was. The notification tone, a sharp, metallic ping, echoed faintly over the clatter of pots and pans. He ignored it. He focused on the pass, wiping the rim of a porcelain plate with military precision, the heat of the salamander broiler radiating against his face. "Chef," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, tight with sudden tension. He was staring at his own phone, which he had pulled from his apron pocket. The chaotic rhythm of the kitchen seemed to falter for a fraction of a second. "Not now, Marcus. We have 3 tables left on the tasting menu," Rupert snapped, his eyes fixed on the perfectly seared duck breast resting on a cutting board. "Chef, you need to see this," Marcus insisted, stepping closer, holding the screen out. The headline of the Crescent City Palette glowed aggressively under the harsh fluorescent lights of the kitchen. "L'Etoile Noire, a star that burns out before it even ignites." By Honora Vance, Rupert wiped his hands on a side towel, his chest tightening as he quickly scanned the opening paragraphs. The review wasn't just a critique of the food. It was an assassination of the restaurant's very soul. Honora hadn't attacked his technique. She had attacked his supply chain, his financial instability, and his arrogant, over-leveraged business model. The chef's reliance on imported Alba truffles, clearly a desperate bid for relevance, masks a terrifying lack of local sourcing. The menu reads less like a love letter to New Orleans and more like the frantic scribbling of a man drowning in high-interest debt. The words blurred together. How did she know about the Alba truffles? He had only received the invoice that morning, and the truffles had been locked in the walk-in ever since. How did she know about the specific terms of his loans? He looked up from the screen, his gaze cutting through the small window of the swinging doors. The dining room was still buzzing with conversation, the amber light casting a warm glow over the oblivious guests. Bellamy was standing near the bar, checking her phone. Even from a distance, Rupert saw the subtle shift in her posture, a sudden stiffening, followed by a quick, calculating glance toward the kitchen doors. She knew. She had fed on Nora the operational secrets, the financial anxieties he had confessed to her in the dark of their bedroom. "Chef?" Marcus asked, his face pale, realizing the magnitude of the hit piece. This is a kill shot. They just published this live." Rupert didn't answer. He watched Bellamy slip her phone back into her clutch and immediately plaster a look of shocked concern onto her face. She began moving toward the kitchen, ready to play the supportive, devastated wife. The hypocrisy of it tasted fouler than ash. He could burst through the doors right now. He could scream the truth across the crowded dining room, expose her corporate sabotage and her affair with the city's most feared critic. He could burn it all down spectacularly in front of the investors she was trying to impress. "Keep the line moving, Marcus," Rupert ordered, his voice dangerously quiet, vibrating with a cold, terrifying restraint. "Finish the service. Flawlessly. Do not let them see us bleed." He turned back to his station, picking up his knife. The review was out. The damage was done. But the night wasn't over yet, and he refused to let Bellamy dictate his surrender. The last guest departed Latoile, nor shortly past midnight. The dining room, previously buzzing with the manic energy of a high-stakes opening, now felt hollow and exhausted. The bussers had cleared the tables, and the amber lights were dimmed to a sullen glow. In the kitchen, the deafening roar of the exhaust hoods had finally ceased, replaced by the jarring clatter of Marcus tossing the last scrubbed pans onto the metal racks. Rupert stood alone at the center prep island, staring blankly at the stainless steel surface. His chef's coat, pristine hours ago, was now stained with demi-glace and sweat. He felt entirely hollowed out, as if the review had physically scraped the ambition from his ribs. The heavy swing doors pushed open. Bellamy stepped into the kitchen, the crimson silk of her dress a stark contrast against the utilitarian glare of the fluorescent lights. She moved toward him with an expression of manufactured devastation, her eyes wide, her hands reaching out as if to comfort a wounded animal. "Rupert, my God," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly. "I just saw it. On Nora's review, it's a bloodbath. I can't believe she published that mid-service. How did she even know about the Alba truffles? Or the financing structure?" Rupert didn't move. He didn't look at her hands. He kept his gaze fixed on the gleaming edge of his favorite chef's knife resting on the cutting board. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the walk-in refrigerator. "Because you told her," Rupert said. His voice was entirely devoid of anger, a terrifyingly flat, dead sound. Bellamy's hands froze in midair. The mask of the supportive wife slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of genuine panic before she quickly reassembled her features. "What? Rupert, you're in shock. You're not making sense." "Why would I ever? I was in the wine cellar on Wednesday," he interrupted, finally lifting his head to look at her. His eyes were cold, reflecting the sterile light of the kitchen. "I heard you, Bellamy. I heard you and Honora. I know about the regional director position. I know Crescent Hospitality wants this building, and I know you fed her my financial anxieties to bankrupt me." The color drained from Bellamy's face. She lowered her hands slowly, the pretense of comfort vanishing entirely. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt colder. She didn't deny it. The ruthless pragmatist in her immediately recognized that the game of deception was over. She straightened her posture, the soft curves of her crimson dress suddenly looking like armor. "It was a sinking ship, Rupert," she said, her voice dropping its trembling act, hardening into the clipped, corporate tone she used in boardrooms. "You leveraged everything we had. The margins were too thin, the location too expensive. You were going to drag us both into ruin. So you orchestrated my failure to secure a promotion?" he asked, a bitter laugh escaping his chest. "You sold my dream for a corner office. I salvaged an asset," Bellamy countered coldly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Crescent will buy the lease from the bank when you default. They'll rebrand it, streamline the menu, and make it profitable. And yes, I will be the regional director who hands them the keys. It's business, Rupert. It's survival." "And Honora?" he pressed, the question leaving a foul taste in his mouth. Was sleeping with the city's most feared critic also a business strategy? Or was that just a perk? Bellamy flinched slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "Honora and I, we understand each other. We operate in the same reality. You've been living in a fantasy world of Michelin stars and culinary art, Rupert. Someone had to wake you up." Rupert looked at the woman he had married 7 years ago, searching for a trace of the person he had loved, the partner who had supposedly shared his vision. He found nothing but a hollow, calculating ambition. She hadn't just betrayed his marriage. She had methodically dismantled his life's work with the clinical precision of a corporate raider. The choice before him was brutally clear. He could fight. He could hire lawyers, contest the review, rally the remaining investors, and drag out a messy, public divorce while desperately trying to keep L'Etoile Noire afloat. It would be a war of attrition against Crescent Hospitality and the Crescent City palette, a battle that would consume the next 5 years of his life in bitterness and stress. Or he could let the ship sink, exactly as she had planned, and walk away from the wreckage entirely. He looked around the kitchen he had designed, the stoves he had selected, the copper pans he had seasoned himself. It was a beautiful, fully equipped tomb. "You're right," Rupert said softly, the fight suddenly leaving him entirely. "It is a business." The finality in Rupert's voice seemed to unsettle Bellamy more than if he had screamed or thrown a pan across the room. She stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light, her crimson dress suddenly looking less like armor and more like a theatrical costume that had outlived its scene. For a fleeting second, the sharp, calculating executive faltered, replaced by a woman realizing she had fundamentally misjudged the man she married. "What do you mean?" "I'm right," she asked, her tone dropping its corporate edge, suddenly laced with a thin wire of apprehension. "Rupert, be reasonable. We can negotiate an exit package. Crescent will compensate you fairly for the equipment and the lease transfer." Rupert didn't answer immediately. He turned back to the stainless steel prep station, moving with a deliberate, haunting calmness. He reached for his leather knife roll, the one he had carried since his first apprenticeship in Lyon. Slowly, methodically, he began wiping down his blades. The heavy cleaver, the flexible boning knife, the razor-sharp chef's knife, and sliding them, one by one, into their custom slots. "There's nothing to negotiate, Bellamy," he said softly, the rhythmic slide of steel into leather filling the silence of the kitchen. "You wanted a sinking ship to salvage? You have it." He zipped the thick leather roll shut, the sound loud and final in the echoing space. He pulled off his stained chef's coat, folding it with precise, almost reverent movements, and laid it gently over the back of a prep stool. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt, stripped of his title, his armor, and his dream. "Rupert, stop," Bellamy demanded, stepping forward, a genuine note of panic finally breaking through her composed facade. "You can't just walk out on opening night. The investors, the loans, you're legally bound. You have responsibilities here." "My responsibilities ended the moment you decided my failure was your promotion," Rupert replied, picking up his knife roll. He looked around the kitchen one last time, committing the gleam of the copper and the smell of the extinguished stoves to memory. It was the hardest thing he had ever built, and the easiest thing he had ever lost. "You're going to bankrupt us both out of spite?" she asked, her voice shrill now, echoing off the tile walls. "Honora's review will destroy you in this city, Rupert." You'll never open another restaurant here. I know, he said simply. He walked toward the swinging doors, stopping inches from where Bellamy stood. The scent of her expensive perfume, the same gardenia and dark tobacco that had haunted him for days, washed over him. It no longer smelled like betrayal. It smelled like poison he had finally stopped drinking. He reached for his left hand. The gold band caught the harsh overhead light as he twisted it slowly over his knuckle. It slid off with a terrifying ease, a small, heavy circle of metal that suddenly felt entirely meaningless. He reached out and placed the ring precisely in the center of the stainless steel kitchen pass, the same spot where he had inspected every plate of food that had gone out that night. The quiet clink of the gold against the metal sounded louder than any shouting match they could have had. Bellamy stared at the ring, her breath hitching, the reality of her sterile, calculated victory crashing over her. She had the location. She had the promotion. She had Honora. But as she looked from the ring to Rupert's face, she realized the devastating totality of what she had traded away. Rupert pushed open the heavy kitchen doors, stepping out into the darkened, empty dining room. He didn't look back at the woman in the red dress, nor did he look at the perfect, empty tables waiting for a Saturday service that would never come. The kitchen is closed, Bellamy.